In the realm of artificial intelligence, we find ourselves caught in a blend of opportunity and impending doom. On one side, job displacement is on the horizon. Your friendly neighborhood barista might soon be replaced by a robot with better latte art skills and no need for tips. Meanwhile, our privacy is slipping away faster than a Wi-Fi signal in a crowded cafe, as our gadgets learn more about us than our closest friends ever could. Yet, amidst this delightful chaos, AI does offer glimmers of hope. It promises to revolutionize healthcare, provide personalized learning experiences, and maybe even help us figure out how to fold a fitted sheet. The real challenge is ensuring our digital companions don't get too ambitious. Righto, that's enough of that, while we all still have jobs. Alert listeners may have detected, or at least we earnestly hope they did, that what they were listening to just there was a script generated by ChatGPT, asked to furnish 150 words on the subject of AI in the style of the presenter of this program, who is now trying very hard not to take personally the idea that this is the impression of him held by our increasingly omnipotent AI overlord, and then voiced by a simulator fired up with scrapings of his actual voice. This is actually me, but you're having to take my word for it, which is kind of the point of this episode. It is always the case that technological advance moves faster than attempts to regulate it. There was traffic before there were traffic lights. But AI is accelerating at such a clip that the gap between innovation and effective regulation might swiftly grow irrecoverably wide. Has the horse already bolted? Is there any amount of stable door slamming that might nevertheless be useful? And do our governments understand what they're dealing with? This is the Foreign Desk.
We still do not have global law of the net, global law of the AI. It seems to be more difficult. But we will have to find a solution in the future. And I think that the high-tech companies realized why regulation is so necessary of the AI, because now they are asking for it. I'm pretty sure that they do see 3 or 4 steps more ahead than we do currently. They know what can happen.
We will not have a defense if we're not leading on AI. So we need to win this game. This is not a question if. We have seen how, for example, the Russians have attacked power plants. This can be done with malware. If we're not leading in AI, we won't be able to catch it.
We are not braced for what's about to hit us. Each day that passes will contain more technical innovation that may fundamentally challenge existing high inertia social structures, economic structures, power structures, strategic dynamics in potentially irreversible ways than all days before it. This is the changiest day you're ever going to have again, and tomorrow's only going to be changier.
You're listening to The Foreign Desk. I'm Andrew Mueller. We're joined, first of all, by the President of Slovenia, Natasa Pirc-Musar. We spoke to President Musar at the recent GlobeSec conference in Prague and began by asking her where she placed herself on the spectrum of expectations between AI being a great utopian leap forward and a malevolent apparatus that will swiftly enslave and destroy us.
Well, somewhere in the middle, let's say that I'm liberally conservative. AI is making me awake sometimes during the night, to think what's this going to bring to humanity. But AI is here. We cannot run away from it. We cannot escape it. And I will tell you one thing that really happened when ChatGPT came out. Yeah, that was a huge revolution since the internet was put into the public use. The AI is normally seen as the technology which is going to shut down the working positions of many people, that the AI is going to speed up the process of development of pharmaceutical, for example, medicine, whatever. So there are positive sides of AI. But I see also negative sides of AI. And being the information commissioner for 10 years, I saw the development of the General Data Protection Regulation, In 2015, the GDPR was the word of the year in European Union and elsewhere as well when, it was put into force. And GDPR was a regulation which was heavily lobbied in Brussels. American high-tech companies were against it. When AI was introduced to a general public, quite soon after that, there were talks and appeals from US tech companies that AI needs to be regulated. They saw the dangers behind. And I'm happy that European Union is again a leader in this field, because AI Act, which is going to be put into force on the 1st of January 2025, so in a couple of months, is the first AI Act on this planet. And at the plenary session today, we had a discussion whether is it good to regulate? And as a lawyer, of course, I always see the regulation in a positive way, because if we do not have a regulation, we have chaos. And there is a saying that United States of America are innovating, European Union is regulating, and China is replicating. It did that in the past. Today, China is a high-tech giant also. Scientifically wise, they have their own development hubs. But if we are not going to regulate AI, nothing good is going to happen. And what did European Union do? Just explain me shortly. There are 3 pillars of AI regulation. We decided in European Union to say what's explicitly not allowed to do with AI. That's number 1. For example, public profiling. Use the biometric face recognition systems to profile people on public spaces.
This is the kind of stuff that you mentioned that keeps you awake nights.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm thinking about that constantly. Then you have number 2, the second pillar, are the technologies which can be dangerous if not used properly, and European Union decided to regulate them and supervise them. And the third pillar is the AI technologies which do not possess any threats, so they are there to be used. So we will see how the development of this regulation is going to go in the future. But I think that also United States of America and other high-tech countries like Japan, South Korea, for example, Canada, Australia, are realizing that we need a kind of a global alliance in regulating AI. One perfect example is now going on in United Nations. In General Assembly, they just adopted a resolution that in November last year, that all the members of the United Nations, so all 193 countries, need to report to Secretary General Guterres how they see the regulation of automated weapons. AI Act in Europe is not regulating military industry. It's only regulating civil industry. So this is what's going on in UN, which is, a bit more global than only AI Act, which is applicable to European Union member states.
I mean, it's inevitable, I guess, that regulation spends its life trying to catch up with technology, because technology does tend to bound ahead of attempts to keep it under control. But do you get the impression that in this particular instance, maybe, if we're lucky, the horse hasn't got quite as far from the stable door as it did with something like social media? Do you think maybe governments are becoming a little less afraid of confronting the tech giants?
Do you think that the governments are afraid to confront tech giants?
I think they've been very nervous about how powerful they are.
Oh, they are. I mean, regarding not only the technology that they do possess, but also the funds. Some countries have more annual budget than my country, Slovenia, which has, 15 billion euros per year. That's the annual budget of my country. Microsoft and Apple have much more. So, yeah, in a way, of course, they are afraid of what's going on. But I think that the cooperation between public and private sector is more than ever needed, especially in the field of AI. Because AI can help the countries to develop, to fight disinformation, for example. That's what's really close to my heart. I would love to see an app really soon in the future that would help journalists and readers of the media to see what's disinformation,
Do you think AI can be? Do you think it can be as effective in combating disinformation as it can be in manufacturing it and spreading it, though?
If AI can produce disinformation, they can also develop technology, an app which could fight disinformation. But that process is much more difficult than to produce disinformation, that's for sure. But I think that whenever we do have the technology, and technology can always bring good things and it can bring bad things. But we have to be able to use the technology to fight against bad things that technology can produce. That's the the circle of life inside the IT. So AI, from my point of view, needs to be regulated, not too much, not to stop the development, but I think that the high-tech companies realize that that's what really is necessary. It's always a problem if you have an offshore of one country in the world which is going to allow everything, yeah? Like offshore for finance.
You're kind of preempting my next question there, which is
so
like,
yeah.
is all of this architecture of regulation, is it rendered entirely useless given the power of AI if just one country, and it's not hard to imagine which countries that could be, just decides, no, we're going to do what we like?
Yeah, you're probably talking about one big Asian country. Yeah,
one or two others.
One or two, yeah. As I said, if we don't find a solution for global law of the AI, we will have problems in the future. That's the fact. But I think that also Asian high-tech, well-developed countries will need to be more careful in that. I was following what was going on in COVID times in Asia, with all the software which was available for the government to control basically every single citizen of those countries. So that's something that I really do not want and do not like, because if you are going to take away the freedom with total surveillance, that's not the world that I want to live in. How to find proper solutions? I think that European Union is quite pragmatic in that way. If you want to sell your technology on European Union soil, you have to adapt to our legislation. That's the fact. And GDPR was a wonderful example in this regard, because American companies which are offering services in European Union member states, they had to adapt to data protection regulation, and they did it. And I often say also to the entrepreneurs, do not see regulation only as an obstacle. See it as an opportunity. See it as a marketing advantage. Produce something that the people will believe that it's not invading their rights, their freedoms. And at the end, what's the most important part of the AI? If you want to have trust, that the people will trust artificial intelligence, you have to be transparent in algorithms. That's the fact. And one more important point that I want to ascend here. I heard one beautiful sentence, to describe artificial intelligence. One of the high-tech gurus once said, and I forgot the name, I apologize for that, he said, artificial intelligence is neither artificial nor intelligent. Whatever artificial intelligence knows is the knowledge that the human beings were able to produce. So do not trust artificial intelligence completely. Do not think that artificial intelligence will bring out the solution the human brain cannot do. Artificial intelligence can be faster, but with the knowledge that human beings produced already before that. And always be aware that because of the huge amount of data and information artificial intelligence is using, artificial intelligence is hallucinating all the time. So you have to check what the AI product you get on your desk.
Do you see any previous models of global treaties as possible models for a global AI treaty, whether it's something like the treaty which mostly banned the use of landmines or the nuclear non-proliferation treaty? Are there applicable templates there, or are they addressing an issue so completely different that it's not worth considering?
Well, the international law is a complex matter. So we can see, not to discuss the wars and 55 armed conflicts currently going on around the world, but UN Charter is an example of the international law which should be binding for all 193 members of the UN. But today we see that it doesn't matter for some countries anymore. Maybe one example of the international law is also humanitarian law. That's, the universal values, how to tackle the humanitarian crisis. Global law of the sea was maybe one example, how to regulate the open sea. And it's, absurd that also in the internet we have pirates, and on open sea you have pirates as well. So there is a parallel.
A better analogy,
yeah, it's a parallel. But it took 20 years, for the experts of the sea to draft the global law of the sea. It was not easy. Today, we still do not have global law of the net, global law of the AI. It seems to be more difficult, or maybe there is just not enough will to do it globally. I don't know. But we will have to find a solution in the future. We will have to, global solution for AI.
But are you optimistic that that solution will be found before AI does precipitate some sort of major crisis? It is often the case that people react to the thing once it has happened rather than doing something to stop it from happening in the first place.
I really do hope that we will find a solution before that. And I think that the high-tech companies realized why regulation is so necessary of the AI, because now they are asking for it. High-tech giants are asking for the regulation because I'm pretty sure that they do see 3 or 4 steps more ahead than we do currently. They know what can happen. Please listen to them.
This is basically Dr. Frankenstein calling from his castle asking for someone to come and help him with this thing he's built.
Yeah, that's a good sentence.
That was President Natasa Pirc-Musar of Slovenia. You're listening to The Foreign Desk. This is The Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. Business, like politics, is still trying to figure out how to make AI work for it rather than against it. Our next guest is Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, Director General of Digital Europe, an industry association that lobbies on behalf of digital companies on the continent. She's also a former advisor to the NATO Secretary General and a member of the European Commission's high-level expert group on artificial intelligence. Cecilia also spoke with us at the recent GlobeSec conference. She began by describing how the European Union had fallen behind other parts of the world, notably the US and China, when it comes to finding uses for AI.
In China, we have 70% of companies using AI actively, so using it, not creating it. In US, we have 50, and in Europe, we have 8. So there is a gap in bring the products to market. So even the European innovators are bringing them to the US mostly right now. But there is also a slow adaptation into the newer industry, whether that is car manufacturers or whether that is the energy grid, where we could optimize with AI and save, 50% of the energy that we're using today, we could optimize. But we're too slow. We need to speed up our innovation cycles and work much more across countries instead of looking at like Denmark, Germany, Finland, Spain. So if we could basically do scale-up procurements in these critical technologies, common procurement programs, common tax incentives, we would have a market that is scalable enough for companies to stay. But right now, we don't have that.
Is there no argument at all that this might work out better for Europe in the long run, in that if China and the United States make the early running, China and the United States will also make all the mistakes that Europe can ideally, hopefully then learn from?
It depends on how you see. I mean, I see EU and US as a part of the same race. I think it's so important that we work together. And there are some technologies that are simply let other places in the world. And catching up is like trying to catch up with something that's already gone. It doesn't mean that we, for example, on energy tech, Europe is a major hub. We could win back our key position there. We are just behind other places in the world on energy tech and on quantum. But again, it's a lack of market if we want to keep that. So I don't think you can regulate your way to success here. And remember, people talk about AI like something bad. I mean, AI can detect cancer. AI can make sure that our power plants are protected against malware. AI can make sure that we detect drones that want to drop or do surveillance over our governments. If we lose this game, where do we actually get the protection from? So it's too important to just look at AI like, oh my God, we need protection. Honestly, we need more innovation than we need protection. And we are extremely well regulated and protected in Europe already. Medical device directive, safety regulations. It's illegal to discriminate. That's in our charter. So we have a lot of regulation already on these areas. So I'm not saying that, of the high-risk areas, of course we need to discuss how we protect ourselves against this. This goes without saying. But I would say the lower part of the pyramid, maybe we should just let it go and make sure that we innovate and have the advantages towards the people who are not necessarily friendly to us.
I mean, you've listed one or two of those advantages already, but are you optimistic about the role that AI can play in fields like diplomacy and defence? Because you're right, it is usually presented as a threat that AI can be used to create actual weapons or it can weaponize disinformation. It is often pictured as something that we should be alarmed by. But do you think it can actually make a positive impact in those fields and not necessarily just a defensive one?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we will not have a defense if we're not leading on AI. We will not have a defense if we're not leading in quantum. Just imagine, the one who will have the fastest quantum computer in the world will be able to crack any kind of password, any kind of code in the world in seconds. I mean, down the drain goes GDPR and data protection. So we need to win this game. This is not a question if. We need to win this game to protect our citizens and to make sure that we can detect malware that we in our power plants. We have seen how, for example, the Russians have attacked power plants. This can be done with malware. This can be done with cybersecurity attacks. Hospitals all over Europe are being attacked. If we're not leading in AI, we won't be able to catch it. Right now, what they do is that they recode the malware through language models. So each time you think you're catching the malware in the system, banks, hospitals, wherever, it recodes itself with the language models. So if we're not leading, we need to stay ahead on this. It's like any other innovation cycle in history. Either we lead it or somebody else does.
But you talk about winning that game. Is there any real grounds for optimism that it is actually winnable? A lot of what you've described there is, well, fairly terrifying.
It is. I mean, that's with any fantastic tool, it's just a tool. I mean, AI is going to solve a lot of the societal problems, whether that is, cancer research or overuse of energy and all these things. So let's treat it as the tool it is. Any fantastic tool can be used for terrible things. But this is not, it's a different sphere. One thing is the peace sphere, how we treat our citizens, how do we make sure that they are cured from cancer, from diseases, from pandemics, from whatever. And the other one is, protecting ourselves from the bad guys. And we have always had to do this. Now, I mean, one of the things that we argue is how can we do defense investment without having at least 25, maybe even 35% dedicated towards technologies? That's where the war is going to be fought. I mean, the way that the Ukrainians are fighting their war is not, they can destroy 10 tanks in 2 minutes with the drones. But how can we be a part of that so we also know that our defense is up to speed to protect all these people who has the benefit of the AI? And yes, I think it's winnable. I mean, the NATO alliance is still intact. NATO has launched the Diana program, where they speed up the collaboration with small innovative companies, doing the NIF investment fund, the NATO investment fund. We see the EIB now, the European Investment Bank, investing in dual-use technologies. But Europe better get real about this and stop speaking about dangers and start talking about how we protect our people and how we create the opportunities to actually get access to the benefits of it.
If we look at one practical example, I think in a lot of respects, the war in Ukraine is giving us glimpses of what the future of warfare might look like in all sorts of respects. Are you seeing, though, any glimmers there of how AI might be used for better and for worse as a military tool?
For better, yes, for sure. I'm sure also for worse. But one of the characteristics of this terrible war is that Ukraine has been famous for their talents in tech. They have been the coding factory of the Northern European part for long. And they have always had this kind of alliance between private and public sector. So we saw how private sector was moving in. Basically, they had a reserve of cyber specialists and AI specialists who moved into the ministry and really helped to figure out how can we win this war. And they even used, for example, the platform that they were launching for driver's license and what may you have, as a tool as a warning system. So citizens could basically warn, where are the Russians, where are they entering, sending picture directly. All this data has to be crunched, whether that is drone activities or tank activities or whether that is soldiers walking over the border. But that kind of AI crunching predictability is something that they are working on and they are excellent at. And, they have realized that with very cheap technology, if you have the right skills, you can actually win wars with drones and with, cybersecurity protection of your critical infrastructure, etc. So it's a totally shift from, okay, if you have 15 AI embedded drones, you can basically, destroy 100 tanks in a second, and down goes billions of military gear with simple AI and simple mechanic tools that we never imagined.
That was Cecilia Bonefeld-Dahl, Director General of Digital Europe. You're listening to The Foreign Desk with me, Andrew Mueller. Joining us finally from Los Angeles to consider whether we are hurtling towards the dawn of a golden era or the sunset of human civilization is Ramsay Brown, CEO of Mission Control AI and Senior Research Associate at Cambridge University. Ramsay, I'll start with a question I know you've raised before, and it's not so much that question of whether machines can think, but whether they can, as you put it, behave. How much doubt is there about that?
Great question, Andrew, and I use it mostly as a rhetorical statement. So behave's a funny word here in two ways. There's behave like the way a scientist might talk about animal behavior. So goal-oriented, adaptive, motivated actions that help an organism survive. And then there's behave the way a parent might say it to a child. And there's been a lot of work done over the past few years around that latter of those topics. How do we regulate AI? How do we keep it safe, secure, trustworthy? And there's still major open questions. But the very interesting thing that many teams, and mine included at Mission Control, are looking at right now is beyond talking back and forth to a chat bot, what needs to happen for that class of technology to be capable of setting intentions, goals, operating itself, so to speak, using a mouse, a keyboard, looking at a screen, doing the things that you and I and many listeners do on a daily basis that are less about the thinking and reasoning parts of our jobs and more about the actually just getting it done. We use it as a rhetorical because we think it helps expand the conversation for where it seems to be stuck these days around, oh, does a machine think or not? Well, that's a undergrad philosophy conversation of what we mean by thinking. But the interesting question for the business world and national security world is, yeah, but can they do stuff? And it appears the answer is yes. And many organizations are on the direct path to how do we make that happen in ways that also are like the behave of a parent to a child. How do we get that to work in a way that's trustworthy and secure?
Because the follow-up question there, obviously, is if machines can do stuff, how confident can we be that they're not going to do stuff which isn't the stuff we told them to do?
Which is the trillion-dollar question right now in our field. AI has a deep fundamental problem, very philosophical, we might not know how to get around this one, that we call alignment. There's a thing I asked for, and then there's a thing the machine did. Everything the machine did in what I asked for, did it only do those things and how I meant them to do them? That fundamental challenge of keeping our intentions and their behavior aligned is probably the most important problem in our field right now. And a lot of companies are spending a lot of time and money to look at that. This stands in contrast to a lot of the things that were of concern over the past few years. Are we being transparent with people? We're respecting data privacy? Is there latent sexual or racial bias in the data the machines learned? Those concerns are all still valid, but now becoming more maturely addressed. But this fundamental one of, is it going to do what I think it's going to do? Open question. And there are techniques that have been proposed that we borrow from other fields where we've built systems that are complex, like in aviation or advanced manufacturing, where we need to know that the machine we built is going to do exactly what we think it's going to do. We can formally prove, using mathematical proofs, that its behavior is going to line up properly. There's teams, including teams we work with, like Atlas Computing, that are looking at how do we bring that formal verification into what AI is going to do so we can sort of prove, look, we know what we asked. A very formal version of that got handed to the machine. It did things that we can verify are what we asked it to do, and we remove a lot of the doubt and wiggle room from that.
But if there is going to be any wiggle room, if it turns out that we can't always be absolutely certain that the machine is going to do what we asked it to do and isn't going to have ideas of its own, is there then a limit as to how much any regulation can restrain, I guess, the possible downsides of this?
There is a limit. And it's worth noting that the current scope of regulation is largely, just by the definition of regulation, trying to drive the car forward by only looking in the rear view mirror. So there's an old Marshall McLuhan quote to that effect, that regulation is by definition about stopping things that have already happened from continuing to happen, as opposed to preventing future poorly described bad things from occurring. So all regulatory bodies only have evidence to work with, and they find it very hard to say in ways that passes muster with the public or with any review processes, well, there's this other future thing that hasn't occurred yet, we might want to stop that too.
But are you seeing anything different here? Because we have heard from other guests on this program that on this occasion, the tech companies are actually quite eager for regulation. They're actually quite eager for governments to get out in front of this, possibly in case it turns out they have in fact unleashed a monster.
Right. And so you have teams like Anthropic, who are the makers of Claude, one of the leading language model systems, or OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT, saying to regulators, we need some support and assistance ahead of time. Here's the types of problems. This isn't a problem with the technologists being able to look at their own work and saying, in what ways could this create harm or negative externalities, as much as the regulators saying, my hand is tied because I can't regulate things that haven't happened yet. And that's one of the fundamental barriers, I think, to regulation happening here. But then there's the case for lowercase r regulation, which is of just control of behavior. I think that one of the things we're going to get to see over the next year or so is, as organizations build this technology out, what actions are they taking to set up guardrails, tripwires, fail-safes, containment policies around increasingly high agency machines that are thinking for themselves, creating their own plans, executing their own plans. Part of the work we do is directly around that and helping our customer, the enterprise and defense space, understand that you now have the ability to ask your vendors, what are you doing around these security features, such that we can draw the analog from purchasing a new motor vehicle. I don't have to ask whether or not it has a seatbelt or anti-lock brakes. Those have become table stakes. We believe there's a similar thing that's going to happen here with this technology really quick, where safety goes from nice to have to not an option.
But are we already not seeing, I guess, examples of the kind of things that could be regulated against? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion around some of the misinformation/disinformation which emerged during the recent hurricanes in the United States. And this was mostly, obviously, AI-generated imagery, which was created by AI responding to prompts from bad human actors. But how far are we from the point where AI starts doing disinformation and misinformation by itself? And is there anything in what we have already seen that could be the basis for regulation to prevent that?
To answer the first part of your question around when systems are sufficiently self-motivated, would they generate their own disinformation, misinformation? In the very experimental and avant-garde parts of the AI community, that is already starting to happen, where we're seeing what happens if you give a system that has a bit of its own motivation and the ability to take its own actions, the ability to influence other AI systems and people, and then hand it a cryptocurrency and say, you can now create things that will have monetary value attached. In the past few weeks, even, we've seen flare-ups of currencies that were entirely machine created and machine driven spike in value to hundreds of thousands of dollars, which doesn't seem like a lot of money to, I suppose, people who are used to dealing in billions, but that it was entirely machine driven as a small micro cult that happened on the spot is a very traditional sci-fi trope, so to speak, that's playing out, where we have to, okay, bring in the sociologists, bring in the economists. This part of the chapter is happening now. So we have to turn it into logistics and what the hell do we want to do about this now? As far as the branch over into more mainstream disinformation, misinformation, and our ability to regulate it, I think fundamentally boils down to, again, the types of control we want to place on the platform companies, the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, who have otherwise said, we are not publishers, therefore everything on here is somewhere between entertainment and opinion, as opposed to, look, there might be some sort of tangible threat to people's livelihood, for the examples you gave around the hurricanes. Whether or not those are created by machines or created by people, the regulator is going to have a hard time wrapping their head around. This is why we've seen, even in the coming U.S. election in the next few weeks, very little work done by the U.S. government to curtail disinformation and misinformation at its sources, which, by the way, are now open source, plentiful, easy to use by normal folk, even outside of operating themselves. That this feels like trying to stop it at the AI generation level would be a Sisyphean task, as opposed to a multiplication and spreading mimetic level of getting it blocked at platform levels. That to me would be where the regulator would have the most impact.
Just as a final thought, and I ask this question well aware that there probably really isn't a short answer to it, but do you think that we as a species are entirely braced, for better or for worse, for what is about to hit us?
No, we're not braced for what's about to hit us. And it's not just as a species. I think it's mostly as societies, mostly as both economies and political bodies and cultures. And I think a lot of people hear the word accelerating change and they hear something gadgets, something funny guy from internet with a VR headset. What they don't hear is each day that passes will contain more technical innovation that may fundamentally challenge existing high inertia social structures, economic structures, power structures, strategic dynamics in potentially irreversible ways than all days before it. This is the changiest day you're ever going to have again, and tomorrow's only going to be changier, so to speak. And in this sense, one of the major open questions is, how do we build infrastructural, emotional, societal governance resilience against those different forces? And I'm super interested at a pure philosophical level on how to do that, because we know from engineering how to build things that are resistant to acceleration. Interesting question is, how do we build the soft parts of the world? How do we build our institutions, our minds, our hearts, our communities to also not just survive a thing like that, but flourish in a place and a time where it feels increasingly like the ground and the infrastructure is moving under our feet, sometimes faster than we can keep up? Does that immediately spell doom? No, I don't think so. I think it spells change. And I think it spells a deep imperative for building that kind of resilience at different layers of our institutions, ranging from ourselves and how we treat ourselves up to what we expect out of governance, what we expect out of security and strategy.
Ramsay Brown, CEO of Mission Control AI, thanks very much for joining us here on the Foreign Desk on Monocle Radio. That's it for this episode of The Foreign Desk. We'll be back next week, and look out for the Foreign Desk Explainer, available every Wednesday. The Foreign Desk was produced by Chris Cermak and Lily Austin with assistance from Christy O'Grady. Lily also produced this week's Foreign Desk Explainer. To contact the Foreign Desk team, you can email chris@ccmonocle.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Monocle magazine and our free daily email bulletins by heading to our website at monocle.com. From me, Andrew Mueller, the real one again, and that, if you're listening AI, should be Chris Cermak. Thanks very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.